All right. Hi, everybody. It's our CFB Talk 92. We're going to be talking about Tennessee. My name is Bob Kyrie. I'm going to be joined by my usual co hosts, JD Moore and Sirius. And we're going to have a special guest with us this evening. From The Athletic, we're going to have Joe Rexrode as our guest. In fact, I see he's already here. Wow, that's lightning quick. It's always good to see that. So, Tennessee football is looking stronger than it has in a long time. As both my co-hosts mentioned yesterday during kind of our open discussion, the Vols are possibly the most exciting team playing college football right now with that explosive offense. With the third Saturday in October coming up, hype is high, game day is coming, and a 15-year streak is on the line. So we wanted to talk with an expert as well as hear your calls. So Joe Rexrode is a senior writer and columnist for the Athletic Nashville. He previously worked as a columnist for the Tennessean, and prior to that was a longtime sports writer in Michigan for the Detroit Free Press and the Lansing State Journal. In addition to his writing, he's presently a co-host of the Robby and Rexrode show on 102.5 The Game in Nashville. Joe, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. This is my first Twitter Space experience, so I apologize in advance if I screw anything up, but I'm excited to be with you all.
Oh, don't worry. We've figured out every possible way to screw this up. So you're fine. We'll be the ones to do we'll be the ones to do the screwing. We'll be the ones to be messing it up. So
different kind of Twitter space.
Yeah, exactly. So, kind of just initially, I know you've probably seen this article, and I read it myself a couple of days ago. The Knoxville News Sentinel, John Adams, said Tennessee looks like a better coached football team than Alabama. Is he correct?
The John Adams column you referenced. First of all, I love John Adams. Known John Adams a long time, and I mean, believe me, as soon as that hit the internet, I was like, oh, well. And I thought it was the powerful line from that was 35 years of following Tennessee football, and I don't have it right in front of me, but to paraphrase, basically like he has not seen a Tennessee coach influence or impact the game, something to that of that nature in all his time watching Tennessee football, which I thought was quite a statement by John. Now, do I think they're a better coach team than Alabama? I think that might be a stretch. I think Josh Heupel's done tremendous work, but I would think most people who closely follow college football would agree that Nick Saban's the best college football coach of all time. I believe that. But I think that Josh Heupel deserves a lot of credit, and it's somewhat stunning what he's been able to do in a short period of time in Knoxville.
Joe, when I think about this Josh Heupel change in what we're seeing in Knoxville right now, one thing is just stunning to me is how quickly he's been able to turn the corner and get success in Tennessee when we've seen several of his predecessors, Jeremy Pruitt, Derek Dooley, Butch Jones, failing to get any kind of real strong long-term traction. But Heupel seems to be getting it done within the first 2 years that he's been on the job. What's been the difference that he's been doing as opposed to those of his predecessors?
Yeah, well, I will say this. I think Butch Jones. Well, honestly, you could look at Butch Jones and Jeremy Pruitt both in terms of some of the things they did. Both of them, obviously, any new coach comes in and takes over at least somewhat challenging situation. You're going to have some defections. You're going to have negativity around the program. You got to rebuild the culture. All these things. I think both those guys early there were some good signs. Probably. Especially more for Jones. And, I think for him, it was sustaining it. Obviously the last time Tennessee was in the top 10 along with Alabama when they played was 2016. Turned out to be not a very good game at all. A terrible game, 49-10 Alabama. That was the year that it kind of, caved in Jones, but he did have a good start, not this good. But I think there's still some things to be learned about Heupel and handling the ups and downs, and sustaining it. And at some point, right now he can exceed expectations, and he certainly has. At some point, and this is where Butch Jones got in 2016. They were the SEC's favorite going to that year. They were in the top 10 a lot of the first half of the year. At some point, it's like, okay, now you're Tennessee. Win championships. So. I think that, but if I want to compare Josh Heupel to those two in particular, I think one area he's a lot better at both of them. They were very different, but both of them I think struggled to handle the fishbowl that is that job. I think Butch Jones was, frankly, just too. I think he was too preoccupied with the outside things that didn't matter. With Pruitt, I guess it wasn't necessarily handling the fishbowl; it was just not running the program into the ground. With incredibly sloppy recruiting tactics and things like that. But also, a lot of people. He rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. Jeremy Pruitt did, and you heard a little bit of that coming in. Heupel, by comparison. I've heard the phrase "adult in the room" a lot with him, but there's some truth to it. He's low key, he's even keeled, he's just got a good demeanor to handle what this job is, because it can get I'm sure overwhelming for most people.
Speaking of his predecessors, it seems like if we think back to that time, that there was a lot of focus on recruiting during those two coaching tenures, especially during the Butch Jones era, and it just never really quite seemed to measure up on the field. When you're going out and getting some pretty highly ranked classes, bringing in a lot of students with a lot of turnover, and then it just was kind of a flash in the pan kind of thing where it didn't really translate into those results on the field. It seems with Heupel, it's kind of the opposite where, he's brought in quite a few transfers that have had a big impact, like Hendon Hooker, Brew McCoy, several others, but also whatever the recruiting stuff is getting outweighed by the fact that he's putting out a superior product on the field that is, so far at least in his first year and a half there, surpassing expectations.
Yeah, exactly. Now, one thing to point out there, actually Hendon Hooker was Jeremy Pruitt's transfer. He joined the program before Pruitt got fired, and stuck through it. And basically, it's funny because just a few weeks ago he was talking about how he loved that offense, watched UCF all the time, had some contact with Heupel in the recruiting process, and was thrilled. But I was like, man, yes, like, why did you sign up for Pruitt's offense? And also, good for you that you are now in this offense, because obviously it has suited him extremely well, and he's been just tremendous. But I think one thing you hit on there, Butch Jones had I think he had a number 4 ranked class. I think he had a 4 and a 7 maybe. He had some very highly ranked classes. A lot of kids. He got some major recruits in state too. Jalen Hurd, one who comes to mind. But I think one thing you saw with Butch, and I heard this, kind of in real time, but you saw it play out. I don't think Butch was a great evaluator. Actually, I think that's one area where Pruitt was definitely superior to Butch, and that's one of the bigger selling points for Pruitt was that obviously, as an assistant, he had worn he's out recruiting for Georgia, Florida State, and Alabama. So, hey, you're a good recruiter. Congratulations, But he had actually found some kids along the way in there as well. And he had a reputation as someone with a good eye for talent. And I think some of that is actually even playing out now. Like there, a lot of the, most of the key players still that who have succeeded under Heupel were recruited by Jeremy Pruitt. And I think he did a good job of finding kids. And of course, one of them is going to be on the field for Alabama, Henry To'o at middle linebacker on Saturday. But you're right, Heupel on the field, and I really think it's obviously the offense. It's so impressive to see how they've implemented it so quickly, how they get the players on offense to execute the way they do, and just the way they find matchups and set plays up, and game plans, play calling, all of it's really, really impressive. And that's the driving force.
Speaking of some of Jeremy Pruitt's recruits that came in under his watch that are still there, Cedric Tillman, the wide receiver who was on a lot of preseason watch lists, has been dealing with some injuries. Do you think we're going to get to see him on the field against Alabama, or is it still too soon?
I definitely think that that he's going to give it as much of a go as he can. And Josh Heupel said this week, he had the he had the surgery. You can have those high ankle sprains to kind of expedite the process with the idea of coming back for this game. So if I had to guess right now, I guess he's going to give it a go. But I just, how effective will he be? I wrote something for the Athletic that hasn't run yet, but I said basically 80% Cedric Tillman, I think, would be a big deal for Tennessee. They haven't slowed down at all without him in the last two games against Florida and LSU. And part of that is Brew McCoy emerging. Jalen Hyatt's been good all year, and he was one of the stories of the spring. But Tillman and Hooker still, they have a connection that is special. And I think to win a game like this, you could really use that. And then you add him to what McCoy is now doing, and it's a pretty scary looking fleet of receivers.
One of those guys also includes Brew McCoy, who I know for his recruitment, especially flipping between USC and Texas for so long, was so controversial, but he ended up transferring into Tennessee, and he looks like he's absolutely having a fantastic fit with the Tennessee Volunteers. I mean, just against LSU, the huge game that he had there. What's been his role in trying to make sure that this receiving core is performing at its peak?
Yeah. Oh, well, and he's been a factor all year. But really, I do think that you might look at the Tillman injury as a little bit of an accelerant. He had to just be involved more. I think Hendon Hooker would probably be happy in a given game targeting Tillman like 20 times. They just – but and McCoy was making plays and made big plays in the Pittsburgh game. But especially the last two games, you can see they've had to lean on him more. And essentially, I mean, if you look at Heupel last year in this offense and even at UCF before – they have a lot of receivers, and you would think an offense like this, hey, use your depth, right? But really, he's big on like who are the three guys that are going to be the main guys, and they get most of the targets and the snaps and the production. And so it's McCoy and technically speaking, McCoy and Tillman on the outside and Hyatt in the slot. Of course, a lot of times they're all as far as close to the sidelines as you can get, before the snap. But now McCoy, I feel like we're seeing that chemistry develop, right before our eyes the last couple of weeks. So, like I said, you bring Tillman back to that now, and it's a much stronger. Last year Javonte Payton made big plays for them. Velus Jones was very good, but this trio, especially with Hyatt playing the way he is as well, is far superior to what they had last year.
Joe, what does Hendon Hooker need to do in this game to push himself to the front of the Heisman race?
I'd say win. Win and play well. I guess you could argue if he has some incredible game and they lose a heartbreaker, that he could still be right there. I think he'd still be there. But if you want to talk about pushing to the front, C.J. Stroud is putting up video game numbers. And, of course, if he could play Michigan State every week, my gosh, he'd throw for about 10,000 yards. But I think right now, to me, he's the leader. I know we do for those of us who vote at the Athletic. And I did notice this week that Hooker gained ground on Stroud, with that sample size of folks. So there's some buzz for him. And I think he deserves it. But to be the front runner, probably win this game. Now, if he can win one of these two games, and these two games being Alabama and Georgia, and they don't stumble otherwise, and he keeps putting up these numbers, and I think he's got a shot. It probably would still take a Stroud loss somewhere, which I don't know if that's going to be happening.
Joe, we had some Tennessee callers during the preseason who asked about what it would take for Hendon Hooker to get that Heisman recognition. And one of the things that I mentioned was, kind of want to see him move from managing that offense to really, getting a little bit more trust from Heupel to make throws downfield and really start, stretching the field vertically. And it looks like he's done that this year, and he's off to a really great start. Better passing completion rate than last year. He's averaging more yards per pass. He's got a clean sheet, 10 touchdowns, no interceptions through 5 games. It seems like he's doing all of the things right, and that's why this offense is clicking the way it is. Just how big of a jump has he made from Virginia Tech to his first year as, getting some starting reps at Tennessee to now putting up this kind of a season?
Yeah, well, I think you're right. The vertical shots have increased. It's funny because he had to come in last year when Joe Milton got hurt against Pittsburgh. Now, anybody who knows Pittsburgh's defense, and I covered Pat Narduzzi for a long time, So, his defense, and basically they play that very aggressive, quarters defense, but it's like man, press man and, beat us with the fade defense. You're not running the ball. We're getting after your quarterback. Go ahead and be perfect with those throws. So, that game alone, I mean, he must have, Hooker this year must have thrown 5 or 6 deep balls, and they actually, I mean, Tillman actually dropped one of them that would have been a touchdown, but they connected enough. They won the game. The last year, he came in and probably would have had a bunch more on his season, except Milton had already thrown like 5 or 6 deep balls in that game, and he kept overthrowing them. Of course, Hooker came into that game, was very good, and ultimately won the job. And I think last year he was tremendous for most of the year. But yeah, there's no question that you can see growth. Like you said, you cited the numbers. There is, I think there's just more command out there, is what I see. He made a play, and it wasn't a big play, but it set up a big play. It was the 99-yard drive against Florida, and it was right before he threw a bomb to Ramel Keaton, which was a beautiful pass. And anybody who saw last week's game, he threw a deep 45-yard touchdown to Jalen Hyatt. Couldn't throw it any better than that. But the play he made against Florida right before the Keaton play was, a rare instance of pass rush getting to him, because the protection's been very good. The ball's been out quickly a lot, but the protection's been very good. And he had to, just to evade it was impressive. This was like a 3rd and 10. So evading it, having to go left, having to throw to a well-covered receiver who was also crossing the field going that way. And like the window is like as small as you can, as you can draw up basically. And it was an absolute dart to Princeton Fant for a first down. Again, it's one of those plays that can get lost in a season, but I watched that play. In fact, Joey Halsley, the quarterback's coach, later told me when I was doing a story on Josh Heupel, he doesn't make that play last year. Like there's an example. It's just, and sometimes it's like the offense is a machine, and he operates it very well, but sometimes he also is just making plays like that or making plays with his feet. He's a tremendous runner. The one thing he as a slider, he needs work. And that's one thing you look at with him sometimes. It's like you can't keep taking those hits. And I would advise him this Saturday to really be thinking slide at times. But he's just he's a tremendous runner. He's a competitor, and obviously the team loves it when he throws himself, forward and gets extra yardage.
Joe, I think one of the big matchups for this upcoming weekend in this game is going to be Will Anderson going up against that Tennessee offensive line. Now, granted, Gerald Mincey, starting left tackle, wasn't able to play against LSU because of this undisclosed injury. Heupel is kind of hinting that he's going to be playing this week. What does that offensive line look like against that challenge of the Alabama defensive line?
Yeah, it's a great question. I agree. Obviously, I think Will Anderson has to be a part of any, any discussion. I think you could argue he's the best football player in the country. I think he should be in that discussion. I know quarterbacks typically only win the Heisman, but Will Anderson is an incredible player. And yeah, it sounds very much like Mincey will be back. I think the Tennessee offensive line might be the most underrated part of the team. And the running game, they're very effective. And obviously this offense gives you light boxes, and it's a challenge. There is a lot of RPO in this offense, and Hooker's very good at that. But they are physical up there. I feel like the interior has been really physical when they've needed a yard. They've really wanted to improve in short yardage this year. They have. And it's going to be fascinating because, they've played some good players. I mean, LSU has some good players up front. Pittsburgh has some good players up front. For the most part, they've done the job. This is still a different kind of challenge. So I'm very, obviously, you watch enough Alabama. I feel like Will Anderson is coming at the left tackle more often when I've watched, but he certainly, they move him around. So tackle, sometimes interior lineman, but a lot of times those tackles, and they'll be getting help, I think, to some extent. But it's one of those things where obviously you don't want to let him wreck the game. You also, you don't want to devote too many resources to one guy. And it's not like Alabama doesn't have other really good players up front and on that defense. So this is clearly by far the biggest challenge. I will say, I think Tennessee wasn't sure exactly what they're going to have up front, even in the spring. And they came out of spring, the coaching staff felt a lot better about it. That was one of the things out of the spring that I think they were like, okay, this could be good. I think Darnell Wright moving to right tackle has been key. That's his position. I think he's a pro right tackle, and he's been at left tackle for Tennessee, but I think that's his comfort level, and it's kind of let everything else fall into place. And I think Mincy's been good.
Speaking of defenses, it kind of feels like this game, especially if we have Bryce Young under center for Bama, and then of course Hendon Hooker for Tennessee, that it could really just come down to which team's defense can get, one or two key stops, just enough to slow up the opposing offense to make the difference. If everything is clicking the way that obviously both teams want it to. But how do you think that this Tennessee defense, which is not as good as this phenomenal offense they've got on the field, how do you think they're going to be able to compare against Bama's offense, and if they can get enough stops to make the difference?
Yeah, you just gotta find some stops, and to me the whole key there is getting after Bryce Young and trying to, you got to be able to wrap him up. He's just so tough to corral. He's so good at extending plays and then making you pay downfield for the extra time he buys. But Tennessee is, I think, a limited, average, at times maybe even below average team in the back end. And of course, Jalen McCullough, there's been no update on his status, but of course he got the assault charge Sunday. According to the police report, someone walked into his apartment and then there was an altercation, and so Josh Heupel has not updated that. But right now I would assume he wouldn't be on the field Saturday. So you're talking about a 4-year starter there in safety. So you have to move people around there, and they're already, they have struggled against good competition, but up front they have some players. They got some young players I think are going to be really good. But Byron Young, 2.5 sacks against LSU, leads the Vols with 4.5 on the season, 23 pressures. He's, first of all, a fascinating story. Just a few years ago, he's working at Dollar General, and he's kind of bouncing around and eventually, JUCO route, and he becomes this tremendous prospect. He's really become a problem for opponents trying to block him. And there's a lot of players, on that defensive line. Of course, Tyler Barron, but Roman Harrison has really been making plays lately. They got a lot of depth, and Rodney Garner, I think, is one of the real stars of this coaching staff. And just so many guys, even last year, veterans, they took over who obviously came here under Pruitt, a couple of them under Butch Jones. And it's like he turned them into, like 50% better players instantly. And that's to me is the key. And it's also, can they stop the run? Can they put them in obvious passing situations? They've been mostly good against the run, but Pittsburgh popped a long one on them. I mean, here and there they'll have a mistake, and obviously Jahmyr Gibbs will make you pay very dearly for a slight mistake. If they can keep him under control, though, then I think they can really send that pass rush at Bryce Young and have a chance to get, like you said. I mean, can you mix a couple punts in here? I mean, and with the Tennessee offense, the way it's clicking right now, that could be enough.
Yeah, unfortunately for Tennessee, it looks like Bryce Young being out kind of forced Bama to find its run game again and get it back to kind of what we've seen in the past, where they've definitely been a much more pass-oriented offense up until they kind of had to resort back to running the ball some. So it'll be interesting to see how they handle that. Looking back, this kind of rise back to prominence for Tennessee, I don't think it happens without a lot of administrative support. And it seems like athletic directors in the past have been a little bit of a stumbling block for the program in terms of making bad hires, not overseeing the program the way it needed to be overseen, making some bad contract decisions, that kind of thing. Of course, when they brought in Heupel, they also were able to bring in Danny White before that to, set the groundwork. And it seems like that's been a really successful decision for this athletic department. What kind of an impact has he had in the limited time that he's been there?
Yeah, well, Danny White, it was a huge hire for them in the moment. So in that moment, you're talking about the firing of Pruitt and the NCAA investigation and, firing him for cause and all that went with that. And it was just a mess. And obviously people are departing the program left and right. Getting Danny White was a big deal. And, obviously he's been a really successful AD at different places. Has had some tremendous coaching discoveries, coaching finds, and all of it, and known, as a great fundraiser. And obviously that's it's the family business. And so he's in a family of administrators and coaches, and based on, the numbers for Tennessee, the budget, they want to get their budget into the 200 millions, like the top athletic departments out there. And I want to say, and I don't have it in front of me, but I want to say they've gone from like the 140s to the 170s just in his time. So he's done a lot of things to raise money. And the funny thing is, there was all this excitement about Danny White being hired, and then there was not excitement when he hired Josh Heupel. People wanted, someone more proven. Obviously, Tennessee fans, I think at that point, there may have been some unrealistic expectations, but there wasn't excitement about Josh Heupel. UCF, the perception was that UCF had gone down some since he replaced Scott Frost. And actually, so in a recent story I did on Heupel, I kind of revisited this whole thing with Danny White and like, okay, so how did that really go? And he's like, I absolutely did not want to hire him. Leaving UCF was like, it was painful for him because he loved UCF, and he didn't, like, at first he was like, Josh Heupel is like hands off. He considered him like off limits to him. And then, one of his deputy AD said, well, if you're known for being a great hire of coaches, why wouldn't you hire one that you've already hired? So it eventually came around to, talking to Heupel, not really an interview, but like, okay, what would you think about this? And obviously so far it's been wildly successful. But so you obviously, you have alignment there, with football coach and AD, which is important. And like you said, previous ADs, like I think John Curry's a good AD. He's a good AD right now at Wake Forest. He did some good things too. He came in, and it was a modern AD approach I think Tennessee needed, which is what Danny White has kind of resumed. But obviously the coaching search went sideways, Greg Schiano and all of that. And then, he gets fired and Philip Fulmer gets installed. And so it's like you had this few years in there of, you kind of knew Fulmer was kind of a caretaker AD. He wasn't going to be a super long-term thing, but also kind of paused the necessary kind of modernizing of things, I'd say, at least from the AD chair down. And like you said, Fulmer gives the extension to Pruitt in the fall of 20 when it really wasn't necessary. And then things went, completely bottomed out from there. But I think Danny White so far is living up to the billing. And, it's certainly he's had one major coach hire, and obviously Tennessee fans are very happy with that so far.
Just one quick observation. We had a commenter on the subreddit who noticed, as a UCF fan, he said, if you had asked me a few years ago who would still be employed at this point, would it be Josh Heupel at Tennessee or Scott Frost at Nebraska? He goes, I would not have picked Josh Heupel. I thought that Scott Frost was like the for sure, he was going to bring him right back. And obviously those two programs have had drastically different results. So it is kind of interesting to see how that's worked out.
It's incredible. It's incredible how wrong we are. So many coaches, right? Like the hot, absolute can't miss coach, and so many of them have flamed out like quickly. In some of these recent hires, you think of like the profile of Tom Herman a few years ago, right? Or I'm still stunned that Dan Mullen didn't work out at Florida. Like I don't understand what happened there. And yeah, Scott Frost. I mean, it's funny too. The Oklahoma situation right now. And it's very early, a very tough situation for Brent Venables. But that situation, as Oklahoma fans sit there and see what Josh Heupel's doing at Tennessee.
Yeah. Hey, we have a couple of callers who wanted to chime in. T. Kimball, Tyler Valls, we'd love to hear from you. Thanks for your patience.
Thank you, Brother Wadley. I'd just like to say I am flying into Knoxville this weekend. I'm excited to see everyone, and I'm excited to see my Volunteers beat Alabama.
This seems like it could be one of the best shots that the team has had in that 15-year stretch. I mean, 2016 seemed promising, but as you said, Joe, what we saw on the field didn't quite work out. But is this the best chance, at least in this stretch, in this streak, for Tennessee to make it happen? What do you think, Joe?
No doubt. I mean, and the thing about 2016 is, it was a top 10 matchup, but Tennessee had come back for this wild win over Florida. Hail Mary from Josh Dobbs to Juwan Jennings at Georgia to win that game in the last play. Then they'd lost an overtime game to Texas A&M, really good team. That was their first loss of the year. So they were at the tail end of an incredible stretch, and they weren't really a top 10 team. We found that out eventually. But yeah, I think even going to that game, there was a little bit of a sense of resignation, like, because Alabama was just rolling at that point. That was Jalen Hurts and that team that had kind of opened up that offense. So, best chance. They've had a couple close games randomly. Lane Kiffin's one game, in 2009 was close. Butch Jones did have a real close one, an ugly game in Tuscaloosa. But going into the game, and you asked me this question, I should have figured this out. Going into the game, and I don't have all the point spreads in front of me, but this has to be the best. This might be the best Tennessee has felt going into this game, or the best the general public observing this game feels about Tennessee's chances since Saban's first year in 2007, when Tennessee was ranked, Alabama was not. I think Tennessee was favored, but Alabama blew them out. And of course, then it's been 14 more in a row from Saban over Tennessee. I think it might be the best chance going into the game since then. Unless someone wants to correct me on that, I could be wrong.
Speaking of that 2009 game with Lane Kiffin, they lost by 2. That was the infamous Rocky Block game with Terrence Cody, managing to get in there and cause some chaos on a couple of field goal tries. In your most recent one of your recent articles about Tennessee following the LSU game, you mentioned that the third Saturday in October since the arrival of Nick Saban had kind of been an albatross around Tennessee's neck. And we've seen them, work past some of their demons. They beat Florida again this season, ended that winning streak that they'd built up. Alabama's kind of sitting here alone as the big rival that they've just really been struggling to get past. If this isn't going to be the year, what kind of an impact do you think that has on the team in terms of, with that mentality of if we can't beat them right now, then what's it going to take?
Yeah, well, I mean, but the thing is, I still think like Alabama still my pick to win it all this year, that's the problem. It's like, so this is our year, but once again, they are a team that easily could win it all. That's the thing. This is mostly about Alabama. Well, I guess it is about both things, right? It's about Alabama becoming the best sustained program in modern college football history. And it's also, it is in tandem with Tennessee struggling much since the end of the Fulmer era. The crazy thing about this rivalry is, I think it's 59-8 Alabama, right? So that includes 15 straight from Saban. So when Saban came, it was a close rivalry, it was considered a rivalry. But even before this, Fulmer won 10 of 11 because Alabama couldn't find a coach, And then before that, you had obviously Bear Bryant. Most of his tenure was dominating Tennessee, and then go back to Robert Nealon dominated. It's weird how, because sometimes you think about this with in-state rivals, like, well, one's really good, the other can't be really good or something. There's no reason this should have been like this, and it just kind of worked out this way that, one of them seems to be really good and one of them not for stretches. And of course, if you're a Tennessee fan, you're like, well, guess what? It's about our turn. But I wouldn't look for that until and unless Saban's hanging it up. So to answer your question, yes, this is the best opportunity in a long time, but you're still talking about more than a touchdown underdog at home, right? I think you're still in a situation where if this is a sign of things to come, then maybe you have some more shots at these guys in years to come.
We got one more caller up here, and I wanted to hear from him. Hob Buggins, how you doing, man? What's up?
I'm doing well. How y'all doing, ladies and gentlemen? I just got home from work in the gym, so I just hopped on. So I don't know what your discussion has been outside of Bama, but I wanted to chime in here because as being a WVU fan and in the Big 12, I genuinely, unbiasedly, because I'm not even a conference guy. Like, I don't root for the conference, but I think the Big 12 from top to bottom is the most competitive and toughest league in college football this year. And on top of that, too, I have a feeling if Bama does what they do, Georgia does what they do, but let's say one of them, let's say they both lose a game in between now and the playoff, shit happens in the Big Ten, Clemson, who knows? But like, I have a feeling in regard to the first ever 2-loss playoff team might be Texas if they go and beat everyone else like they did to WVU and like they did to Oklahoma. There's a lot that has to happen, but I have a feeling that like if people start dropping in games they shouldn't lose to, and there is a discussion like with Texas A&M a couple years ago of like, oh, this 2-loss team might sneak into the playoff. I think it might be Texas. I don't know how y'all feel. Texas, but I mean, they've looked damn good for the last couple of weeks. And the Big 12 is, I mean, WVU and Oklahoma is competing to see who's the shittiest team in the Big 12. And that's amazing to me personally.
It is. I mean,
Joe,
that's a heck of a league. I will. You gotta give it up to the Big 12 this year.
Joe, this kind of brings up an interesting question, because I know when we're talking about Tennessee, obviously this is, as we've kind of talked about, this is a good opportunity as any for them to break the streak. But let's say it doesn't happen and the Vols fall, hopefully in a close one, if it is something like that. What would be a good season for the Vols to have this year? What's a realistic season that you would consider to be a huge success for Heupel heading into his second season?
Well, I said going into this season that 10-2 is on the table. I mean, I picked them to go 8-4. At this point, look, I think they should go 10-2. I think that they should win every other game on their schedule. The only other game on their schedule that I look at that I'm not totally sure on is Kentucky coming to Knoxville, and I like the Vols based on what I've seen. I know that Levis wasn't playing in the South Carolina game, but I think they should win that game. So I think it's a hugely successful season if they get that done. 10-2, and they're probably in the Sugar Bowl, right? I mean, I think they're in some New Year's Six bowl, probably the Sugar Bowl, if they do that. Which means you're talking about best season, best bowl game. You're going back to the end of the Fulmer era. I mean, you're going back to Philip Fulmer's era when you've had this kind of success in a particular season. So I think that's wildly successful. It's funny talking about playoffs in Texas, 2-loss and everything. Actually, here in Nashville, I had people yelling at me one day because on my radio show here, I threw out there, what if this is a couple weeks ago, like what if Tennessee loses really close games to Georgia and Alabama and wins out? Why would that not be? I mean, no one else has to play Alabama and Georgia other than Auburn, but why would that not be a playoff caliber 2-loss team?
I also feel bad for jumping into an SEC conversation because, I would take Tennessee over Texas in that regard. So that defeats whatever I just said a couple minutes ago.
Well, no, it made me think of that. And, I mean, but it's an interesting point because you're right. Texas looks ridiculous. And, I mean, we look at that Texas-Alabama game like, oh, man, one of those games for Saban, but, well,
I mean, if
Texas looked pretty good
doesn't
that day.
go down, there's legitimate chance they win that game because Alabama, I mean, Ewers looked damn good against Bama dropping dimes, but that's the last thing I'll say. I apologize.
No, for sure.
Sirius, I know you had a quick follow here.
Yeah, just, looking at it now, it seems like 9 or 10 wins is kind of the expectation for the regular season this year. And we know that Vol fans are, they're competitive. They have very high expectations. They're excited about this kind of return to prominence. But what does it look like for Tennessee's chances to build off of a 10-win season potentially? And moving into 2023 for Josh Heupel, we know he's going to be losing Hooker, may lose some other talent. How is he going to be able to transition into, finding that next starting quarterback and keeping this offense rolling the way it already is right now?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think one thing that this season care of in terms of a narrative I heard a lot going the season was, all right, these D coordinators have seen this offense now, so let's see if they can keep, giving people problems. Yeah, they're going to keep giving people problems. They still haven't really. Now, look, that's the thing. This has gone very well. We still really don't know about Heupel as an evaluator, right, of high school talent. I mean, he's brought in some players who have come in right away and play, but eventually it's going to be all his guys, his offensive line. Again, a lot of these guys were here, and they've done a great job coaching them up, but we're going to find out more about his recruiting and evaluating all that stuff. And next year is I think they could be very good. They would return. They return a lot of guys, or could. There are a lot of guys who have eligibility. Quarterback's the obvious question. They have Nico Iamaleava coming in from California, 5-star quarterback. I think right now, I think Joe Milton is in line to be the starter, and I know some Tennessee fans don't get excited at that prospect, and we're gonna find out if that's the case. But Joe Milton is tremendously gifted, and I still believe Joe Milton can be a good quarterback. Can he be what Hendon Hooker has been? Well, I mean, you're talking about a guy who right now is right in the mix for a Heisman. But I think Joe Milton could win you a lot of games. You could have a good season. I could also see certainly a step back to some extent, in year 3. So it's like, I could see. I think you can get unrealistic expectations as a result of a season like this. And that's just, look, that's what happens, right? You raise the bar, you raise expectations, you got to deal with it. You created that monster. But I think Tennessee fans should be realistic and look at this season as, look, right now it's just an incredible mix of players and coaches. And Hendon Hooker wasn't brought here by Heupel, and then he wasn't Heupel's choice. It was Milton. And eventually they kind of found each other and they're just rolling. So this is a special team, a special season, and it may be a while before Tennessee, can get back to something like this.
Joe Milton, I think, has the potential to be a great quarterback if you can just get him to take about 15% off of those deep throws. Put a weighted wristband on him or something, because he's shown some potential. But gosh, those really bad overthrows just kind of they've killed some drives in the past.
Joe, as we wanted to respect your time. We know you had about 30 to 40 minutes, and we've got a little bit over. But I wanted to just kind of ask a couple quick kind of wrap-up questions. And this one, I'm not asking, we don't necessarily expect to go into superb detail on this, but for those listening, how do you think Tennessee could beat Bama? How do you think it would happen this weekend?
Well, I think, again, I think you've got to win the turnover battle. Probably you certainly you can't lose it. And Alabama's had issues, I kind of throw the last game out. I think with Bryce Young in there, that's how you want to evaluate Alabama. But you need to tip a pass at the line, pop the ball out, get a big play like that. You got to finish in the red zone. But Tennessee's been, they've been excellent in the red zone as well. You have to have touchdowns. You do what you do offensively. I think there's so much confidence for Tennessee that its offense is going to work against whoever wants to come out on that field with them. And if you go back to last year's game, they were blow for blow with Alabama, still just a touchdown down. It's 31-24 early fourth quarter. So it's not like they were just going up and down the field at will, but they were having success. And then actually one of Hooker's 2 picks as a starter happened when it came back the other way and the game got away from them. But they have they got more than 3/4 of football on tape in Tuscaloosa right there with that team. So I think their offense, they do what they do. And then you just got to mix in some stops. You get a big special teams play or a big turnover, but you got to be able to stop the run, make them one-dimensional, make them obvious passing, and then you just hope that Bryce Young still doesn't just poke holes in your defense all day. Alabama's going to move the ball and make big plays and score points, but mix in some stops, mix in a few stops, and Tennessee, it's not like it's some far-fetched or unattainable formula here for the Vols to win this game.
Hey, Joe, as we wrap up, where can our listeners find you and follow your work, both, your audio work on radio as well as the written word?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking. Well, at Joe Rexrode on Twitter, and then of course I work for the Athletic. I'm the columnist here in Nashville, so I write a lot about the Vols, but also Titans and Predators and Vanderbilt and other teams as well. And then I'm on 102.5 The Game in Nashville, 6 to 10 a.m. every weekday. So of course we have the Game Nashville app also, so you can stream it there. So there you go.
Awesome. Hey, Joe, thanks so much for joining us. This was really interesting talk, and I learned a lot. I appreciate it, and I know it was probably great for all our listeners. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me. I've done Twitter Spaces. It's very cool. You guys were awesome. Thanks for the great conversation, and I'd love to do it again sometime.
Absolutely. We'd always love to have you back. Thanks for joining us.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Have a good night.
All right. Well, thanks to all of you out there for listening. This was our CFB Talk 92. We were talking volunteer football with Joe Rexrode of The Athletic. That's all we have for now. Thanks for joining us. My name is Bobak Hayeri. I was joined by my co-hosts, JD Moore and Sirius. We always love having you join us. We hope you have a good night. And now hang up and listen.